We are not alone. You are watching Contact TV with your hosts, Lesley Mitchell-Clark
and Wes Roberts,
exploring ufology, metaphysics, and beyond with the world's foremost experts. We are not alone. And good evening, folks, on this wonderful All Hallows Eve Celtic New Year Samhain festival that is taking place throughout Europe and the Americas and probably elsewhere. And we'd just like to welcome you to our very special Halloween show. And it's special because instead of having one of our wonderful internationally known guests, we are actually going to just do this little show ourselves with my co-host and creative partner in this whole thing, Mr. Wes Roberts. Wes, how are you on this wonderful evening where the veil is thinning?
I am great, Lesley. Thank you. We're delighted to be here with you on this special Halloween edition. We know you might not see it Halloween night, but we hope you do. It's chilly out there, and it's going to be dark and spooky later. And we hope to entertain you and enlighten you with news and some real-life stories.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So, Wes, in keeping with that, I think we should do some shout-outs to the wonderful people who have been so incredibly supportive of the show. First of all, I have to say that we must mention our good friend Dave Scott, who is the host of course, Spaced Out Radio, which 6 nights a week has UFO and metaphysical and parapsychological programming going. Dave is a superb host. He's an unusual anomaly in this business in that he is a seasoned radio professional who has, in fact, because of his own experiences, embraced this. And of course, Spaced Out Radio, we also live there on their website, spacedoutradio.com. So Dave Scott and all the wonderful people your volunteers who help put it all together, and your wonderful guests, we do thank you, and we enjoy living on the spacedoutradio.com website.
Yes, and I'll just give my own shout out to Dave, saying I know we're working through a few little technical issues. I'm sure they'll be resolved, and we have lots of material coming up for you. Thank you.
Oh, we do indeed. In fact, coming up on Contact TV, we're going to be welcoming a really fabulous guest next week, who is one of the key people involved with the late Dr. Edgar Mitchell's organization called Free Experiencers. And I'm going to just keep his name secret for just a bit, but it will be fascinating. He's going to be talking about not only, their worldwide experiencer research project, but his own experiences. And we have never interviewed this gentleman on our show before, either the radio or our current manifestation. So I'm really looking forward to it, because he's a real important figure in the disclosure movement and also in experiencer research. And he's a medical doctor, not like our own, not unlike Stephen Greer. So we'll give him we'll give you further information as we get closer to that. Now, also, we're going to have our friend Len Kasten come very soon, and we'll be presenting his program, I'm going to guess, around mid-December, December 15th. And Len Kasten is, of course, the author of several books, but we're going to be talking about one of our favorites, not his most current book, but one of our favorites, called The Secret Journey to Planet Serpo. So you have to stay tuned for that. It is, it's going to make your hair follicles perk up for sure.
An incredible true story.
Yeah, a true story. Absolutely true, and very much in keeping with I think the recent discoveries that are coming to light about our conjoined military activities, black budget activities, the super soldier program, all of these things now are really making sense as information begins to come out. So there
Hmm.
we go. So that's a couple of things that are coming up. And we have a birthday today, a
Oh yeah.
Halloween birthday for a very special friend of ours, and that would be our friend Greg Summer, who is the owner and operator of
Variety Store Productions.
that's right, Variety Store Productions. I paused for a moment because he's just about to
Yeah,
open a new facility, a studio complex, in fact, which is going to have another name.
that's it. That's it.
I got befuddled there for a moment, but we wish Greg the happiest possible birthday. I mean, there isn't a sweeter, nicer guy in the world, and we wish him every luck with his new big project coming up, and we look forward to seeing him soon. And also, we look forward to seeing all of you folks out there in uh, um, in interweb land. We look
Hmm.
forward to seeing you at the Alien Cosmic Expo 2018, which is going to be at the Marriott Hotel, very close to the airport in
Hmm.
Toronto. And although we're not at liberty to disclose a whole lot of guests, we can confirm that Linda Moulton Howe will be a honored guest, and also the really lovely and intelligent Kathleen Marden. And Kathleen Marden is the niece, the biological niece of Betty Hill, as excuse me, as in the noted abduction, I hate to use that word, event of Betty and Barney Hill that has
Hmm.
sparked a whole generation of interest in ufology. And Kathleen is one of the individuals who heads up the Experiencer Research Program, which is part of MUFON.
Hmm.
So again, we're going to be focusing on experiencers, and I think it's just going to be a wonderful event. And it is being, of course, produced and sponsored by MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. So we look forward to seeing you in, I believe, is it the third week of June? You can just go to AlienCosmicExpo.com and get the info.
And hopefully, folks, you'll see our shiny and brilliant presence there. But you know, we're working on it. We support it nevertheless. But we hope we'll see you there.
Absolutely. All righty. So, ghost stories.
Oh yeah.
this this is this is the time of year, of course, where it's not only Celtic New Year, but it is an ancient pagan festival day called
Hmm.
Samhain, which we discussed a good deal last Halloween when our guest was Ahonu, who,
Yes.
of course, is a mystical Irish-born writer, a visual artist, just an amazing guy. In fact, he's come out with a Halloween coloring book, believe it or not, Ahonu. So just go to Ahonu 8 HONU.com, and you can take a look at all of his marvelous art and his projects with his beautiful partner, Anne Gale. Anyway, that's it is Samhain, and I believe there is plenty of evidence to support the idea that at this particular day of the year, the veil, if you wish to call it, between the seen and the unseen. Perhaps you can call it a interdimensional bleed through, or however you wish to think of it. But it is absolutely true that something mystical happens, and communication with the other side is and manifestations are much easier during the whatever the electromagnetic condition is of
Hmm.
October 31st. If that weren't the case, there wouldn't be so many pagan festivals which take place at exactly this time relating to death and communication. Dia de los Muertos, and there are Asian festivals that correspond to this day, ancient Shinto rituals which go on. So there's something significant. So we are here to thin the veil, as we call it, and both Wes and I are going to tell a few of our own ghost stories, and I'm going to talk about a couple things that I've never discussed before. So,
Likewise.
yeah, all right. So, Wes, let's get right to it now. Now, I know we talked about on the show a few times about your awakening to your, your psychic abilities and your sensitivities. You really were born with the shining, as we say. You've had remarkable experiences, some of high strangeness, all of your life, really. And so I think you were, when did you really first become aware that you had something special that maybe not everybody did?
Like yourself, we've been involved in this for a long, long time. For most people that are involved on this level in some psychic way or paranormal way, it usually happens in our teens.
Hmm.
And that was certainly true with me. I would say I was 14 or 15 when I had a sudden urging to begin to investigate things that go bump in the night. And
Hmm.
I recall being at high school and for unknown reasons going to the library and for unknown reasons going to the occult section and looking up a couple of key books that would change my life forever. One was on mediumship, classic
Hmm.
mediumship, and the other had some other thing to do with the paranormal. So that was really my start, and I thought, wow, I've had these inklings. I'm feeling something odd about me. I wonder what it might be. Am I meant to be one of these people? And at that time, it would be, was I meant to be a medium? And so that opened Pandora's box and every other mystery you can just imagine from that point on. And I was having unusual experiences at that point. I was having spontaneous out of the body experiences at that
Hmm.
point. I didn't know what they were. I thought I was dying. A lot of people go through this. When they have a spontaneous out of the body experience, the body gets rigid, it becomes cataleptic, it's frozen, you can't move. Your spirit or soul or body devil is being pulled out of your body. And I remember a few terrifying nights where
Hmm.
I went through this. And around the age 15 or 16, and in fact, it was a Halloween night. There was a broadcast on the radio, an AM radio station. It probably was Chum, if you're around these here parts. Chum AM in Toronto. And there was a broadcast Halloween night talking about all spooky stuff. And I was listening on AM radio, and they mentioned this unique organization that was already active in Toronto, was affiliated with the University of Toronto, was populated with professional people, degreed and credentialed people, serious investigators of the paranormal. And I thought, wow, this is for me. And so I contacted this organization when I was 16 years old, and my letter must have seemed bizarre to them because I talked about psychic feelings, about experimentation with seances, and all this kind of stuff. And they probably thought, here's a classic nutcase, right? And a young one. And so, so they were kind enough to write back, tell me that I was too young to be admitted as a member. And I was in touch with them till I was admitted, which was when I was 18. And so I
Hmm.
was their youngest member at that point. And it was a paranormal or parapsychological research institute. So things were done by the book. Experiments were measured, quantified, and qualified. And so from that point on, I began to get sort of the lab view of the
Hmm.
paranormal, all the while still having unique parapsychological experiences of my own. And without sort of hogging the conversation, we can get back on this note, Lesley, because there is one I went through when I was 16 or 17 that has all the hallmarks of a typical haunting. So I don't know if you want to tell one of your stories and get back to this one.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Carry
Okay.
on. Launch right into it.
So I was working at a very young age. I was 17, I think. I had access to advertisements being printed in newspapers. This was the nature of the place I was working at. And one advertisement caught my attention, and this was before it was published in a newspaper. Somebody in a small town in Ontario, the province in which we live, was advertising their house for sale as a haunted house for sale. So this
Mm.
was an amazing thing to me. Somebody was openly advertising their home as a haunted house for sale. So I had access to this person's phone number and all that ahead of time, and I phoned her. And I said, well, I've got an interest in this stuff. I've got a pretty good camera. I had a 35 millimeter camera at the time.
Mhm.
Can I come up and stay overnight? I mean, how outrageous is that, eh? A 17-year-old. Can I come and stay at your place? And so I had a little motor scooter. I'm not kidding you. And it was a dark and raining night, pouring rain. And on my little motor scooter that couldn't go any more than 40 miles per hour, I took this trip, which took me 2 hours in the pouring rain, slowing down traffic all the way because it couldn't get over a certain speed, finally getting to her home, finding her home at around 10 o'clock at night in the dark in the pouring rain. She took me in and greeted me kindly, gave me a change of clothes because I was soaked, and then talked about her home, her haunted home. And one of the key experiences before she went to bed, and I stayed up sort of looking around this place, one of the key experiences I went through was she took me into the hallway. And in the hallway there was a little enclave, no window, just an enclave where you might put a plant stand and a plant. And true to life, true to hauntings, it was cold. It was the only cold spot in the house. And it was an unnatural or supernatural cold. It was the first time I ever experienced a real cold spot due to spirit presence. And it was fascinating. Made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And I was really freaked and really hyped at that point. So she goes to bed at around 11:30 or midnight. And I'm left to wander around the house at my leisure. And I was taking photographs. I might even have some old slides that I had made from that time. I know, 35 millimeter slides. Give me a break.
Excellent.
Yeah,
I just found a box of them myself.
Yeah, I actually just did. Found a little container of them. So I spent the night there. She had some really odd photographs and paintings in her place that really were disturbing to me at that age anyway. And I stayed up all night, and I went to her basement, and I dried my clothes, and I left that place at 5 a.m. And I got on my little motor scooter and took the 2-hour ride home. And so that was my first really authentic and exciting encounter with the haunted house.
Wow, excellent. And of course, I think that there really is a connection between the advent of adolescence and increase for all of this stuff. I mean, most poltergeist activity is really psychokinetic energy being emanated from teenagers. Most of it. This is something, perhaps the pineal gland or the hypothalamus, the eye of Ra, perhaps those organs become stimulated by the hormonal outpouring that is necessary to create puberty. There's got to be some relationship, but that comes with orneriness and brattiness and increased psychic ability.
I know.
Great. I lived through it twice. Fantastic.
So I totally agree with you there.
Anyway, I'm going to tell.
Yeah, I'm sure you have your own experiences.
So. Well, I'm going to start a little bit earlier than your story, because this haunted house that I'm about to talk about belonged to my grandparents.
Okay.
And I was really born with being sensitive to other things. I thought everybody was. I thought everybody could see auras and what have you. And it took me a little while to understand that I shouldn't talk about those things because it wasn't a common experience. But at any rate, I was. During my parents' divorce, I lived with my grandparents for more than 2 years, and they had been, of course, East Coast people, and at a certain point when I guess I was 9 or 10, they wanted to be near their grandchildren, and these, then I called them elderly, but I guess they were maybe only in their early 60s, but to me they were ancient. Ancient, Methuselah. So anyway, they they moved, which nobody could believe that they would do at their age, so they moved and they bought a home in the San Fernando Valley in the North Hollywood section of Los Angeles that had been owned by a guy named Buddy Cole. Now, that may not be a familiar name, but he was a big deal in the music business. He was Bing Crosby's conductor, arranger, um, years and years and years of credits. In fact, Buddy Cole himself had, and this is quite unusual, had built a 1950s standard recording studio on the property. It was a
Wow.
massive property, big corner lot. So here was this big soundproof studio made out of brick, and it had all that natural echo because they had limited technology. He used to record orchestras in there. So this was a unique part of the property. Now, in that studio, after my grandparents bought the house, that was where my grandfather had his pipe organ and his piano. So I would be doing my piano lessons alone in this studio. Now, I've got to say the studio was one giant cold spot. It was so active. And Buddy Cole himself had died very suddenly of a massive heart attack, and he was not ready to go. I'm not even sure he understood that he was dead in that sense. And from the first time I walked into my grandparents' house, I saw him sitting on the couch smoking a cigarette. And I said to my grandmother, who's that guy? Who's that guy on the couch? So he was a very physicalized spirit, I would have to say. I mean, he was very invested in still being there, and just it must have been a kind of a hell, for him to be so confused and not know where he was. But it was a very sudden death, and whatever happened, he didn't transition right away. One of the other many things that used to happen constantly is that I would be in my room there, which had been the room of his daughter, and his daughter was Tina Cole. That may not resonate right away, but she was a very busy actress. On the series My Three Sons, she played the wife of Robbie, Don Grady, and she was very busy. She was also in the King family and the King sisters and the King cousins because her mother was Yvonne King of the King sisters. That was Buddy Cole's first wife. Anyway, little Hollywood Stone Age stuff. So I lived in the room that was Tina and her sisters. So every morning before my alarm went off at like 6:30, there would be a knock on the door to wake me up. And my feeling is that Buddy Cole must have woken up his girls every morning when he got up early. And it was his habit.
Wow.
Not on the weekends, every weekday. Bam, 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 bam. Not my grandparents, not my father, Buddy Cole waking up his daughters in his mind. And there was, of course, a lot of electromagnetic, lights going on and off, all of that stuff that you would expect just from the phenomena. So in the recording studio, as I mentioned, it was incredibly active. It was a huge cold spot. And there was also an old-fashioned sound booth, the way they used to do it, that was elevated, that was above. So I would hear, if I was playing piano or doing it, I would hear footsteps pacing back and forth in the sound booth, back and forth, and back and forth. And sometimes I would hear the sound of lumber falling. And I don't know why that was. It didn't make any sense. I don't think physical lumber was falling, but I would sometimes hear that. So on this one particular day, and this was right around the time that I quit piano lessons, I was practicing alone in the studio. It was cold as hell, as usual. And I was hearing the steps going back and forth, as usual, above my head. So I was murdering some piece on the piano. I mean, just butchering it, clinks and clangs and gaffs, and because I was so nervous, I couldn't really even get through a piece. I think it was O Chichonia that I was playing. Anyway, there I was going at it, and this massacring of O Chichonia, I mean, it must have gone on for a half an hour. Nobody could have stood it. Nobody. So what happened is the cover of the piano keys very gradually and very slowly came down over my hands, not to hurt me. It didn't hurt at all, just resting there. And then all the lights went off in the studio.
Whoa.
And it was like a tomb because there were no windows.
Holy.
I tell you, I almost, you know, evacuated all internal fluids and substances. I mean, I was beyond terrified. So I just flipped up the piano case and just ran in the primitive sense, like I was running from the dinosaur, ran out of the studio, and that was the end of my piano lessons because I would not, and I was about 13, I would
Okay.
not go down there again. Now, not too long after that, my grandmother, Grammy Mitchell, who was very interested in the metaphysical, she began having spiritualist meetings in the studio. And I believe that process, whatever that group did, I believe that they cleared the space, that he was able to go on his way somehow. And then if that didn't do it, a few years later, both my sister and I rehearsed our many pop bands and rock bands, and my brother Brian had all of his jazz rehearsals in there. So our rehearsing of unsavory material to Buddy Cole may have pushed him out. I'm not sure which, but he definitely was gone. So he has moved. He has moved on, but that's my first little story.
That's an
So
incredible story, Lesley, and I want to ask you something about it. Often it's
yes,
said by spirit rescuers that if we can clearly see a ghost or the deceased, it's because they're looking more in our direction, still attracted more to our energy than to
yes.
spirit energy. Did you feel anything when you saw him?
Oh yes, I felt that he was looking right at me.
Hmm.
I thought he was physically in the third density. I thought he was a real person. Now, in all the entities I've seen over the years, I have only experienced that a very few times.
Hmm.
Usually, what I see could be considered residual energy,
Right.
or I don't often see spirits in that way now. I don't know why that is, but I don't get those kinds of visual experiences that I had. But I think not only was he attracted to my energy
Hmm.
but if he could see my physicality, I even looked like his daughters, blonde,
Okay.
blue-eyed. I think if anything, I was confusing him.
Hmm. That's very possible that you
Yeah,
saw him, that it was a manifestation. I have little doubt he was there.
yeah, yeah. And you could even smell the cigarette smoke.
Whew.
You
That's
could
often a
smell.
sign.
My grandmother would come in and say, "Were you smoking in here?" And I'd say, "No, no, 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 I don't smoke. No." And nobody would believe me because every so often a really strong scent of cigarettes would move through the house, and none of us smoked, like ever. I mean, I did, but not in my grandmother's house. So I'd seen too many French films. You know how that goes. Too many foreign films. I would practice in front of the mirror, letting the smoke go up my nose. So I would get that Catherine Deneuve kind of thing going. But I never smoked in the house.
That is an amazing, true account, an amazing, true story.
It
And we should
is.
remind our viewers, just like we used to do on the radio show, that if you had an odd experience, chances are you did not imagine it. And you should
Oh yeah,
not feel bad. You should come forward and talk about it, please.
that's that's right. That's
Mhm.
right. Absolutely. Um, would you like? I have one other kind of I have a short story and kind of a very long, kind of a longer, cool story. Would you like to go ahead right now, Rob, and then I mean Wes, and then I'll come
Sure.
back in?
Sure. Why don't I
Cool.
tell you about something? I can only tell you and our viewers highlights of it. Was
Hmm.
not a public event; it was quite private. But
Hmm.
it's something that happened about 5 years ago. So have had a lifetime interest in the paranormal, as we've said, in parapsychology, in philosophy, in Egyptology, in magic as well. And so I have lots of good friends that are involved in this sort of self-awareness movement, if you want to
Hmm.
call it that. We're constantly looking at studies and philosophies and using tools that help bring us to the next stage. And so, about 5 years ago, I had two very good friends come up and spend the weekend with me in Toronto. I won't say their names. One was a lady acquaintance, and one was a male acquaintance of mine. And we're all interested in the same thing. So we spent the weekend together talking magic and philosophy and doing all sorts of nifty things. And one of the things we did was one of the three of us, not myself, had created some sigils. So if you're
Hmm.
not familiar with sigils, I'm saying that not to you, Lesley, but more to our viewers. Sigils
Hmm.
are symbols that we draw that can invoke or evoke different things. You might invoke from yourself or evoke from somewhere out there a spirit, a guardian, an angel for some, a demon for others. But nevertheless, if you've done a good job at constructing the sigil, it will probably work. Just the drawing of it or the sketching of it is an act of magic. But the magic gets even better because from that point on, it's created and it's alive. And so it can be used. All you need to do is focus on it, generally speaking. So one of the three of us had created some interesting sigils, and we decided to give them a spin and just to see if anything would happen. So we were sort of, the three of us were looking at and talking about one particular sigil, and we began to feel what we considered to be ominous presence. Now, that's an unusual thing for me to say because
Hmm.
I've dealt with all kinds of presences, alien and ominous, and it's unusual for me to use that word. This is not
Hmm.
normally in my vocabulary.
Hmm.
Ominous is somewhere out there, it's something other people experience. But we three began to feel ominous presence, and all of us were of like minds. This was highly
Hmm.
unusual for us to detect this. And we detected what we felt to be black shadows where the entrance to this hotel room was and where the closet was, dark and black shadows. So we thought that's really interesting. So we sort of put ourselves in the area where the black shadows were just to see if we could detect anything.
Hmm.
And who knows? Who knows if we did or we didn't? We all felt that we did. So a few minutes after that, we just retired. We're plopped ourselves on chairs or on the edge of the bed, and we're just chatting. And simultaneously, the three of us looked toward the door, which was the entrance to the hotel room. And shockingly to all of us, there was a blackness forming, almost as if it was a tangible darkness. And it was not
Hmm.
dark in the hotel room. And the tangible darkness was coming from the door forward, right through the room and right through us. And we were all shocked. I mean, we live for this stuff. We live for important experiences that will propel you forward in your
Hmm.
self-awareness. We live for that kind of thing. We
Yes.
experiment, we read books, we do little bits of work on it, but we were all quite taken by surprise. And
Yeah.
along with this darkness, and I'm not particularly afraid of the darkness, but along with this darkness, there was a cold feeling and a feeling of presence. And
Hmm.
I should say it did not last long. I would
Hmm.
say a minute or two. But we were all
Hmm.
sort of left in awe and in shock because we'd all in our lifetime seen a lot, encountered a lot of presences, done our share of magic, let's call it. And so this was quite an incredible experience. And this was only 5 years ago. And I would say,
Wow.
yeah, 5 years ago. And I
I
would say,
remember I remember when you when you got together with your friends. I remember that.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
it would be in
Okay.
our experience, right? Because we've known each other
Yeah.
for maybe 7 years or something at this
Yeah.
point, or 8 years.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it was just a weekend. I went back and forth to home base, but did stay at the hotel room the last night. So it was an incredible experience, and I would say to our viewers again, um, this is nothing necessarily to be afraid of. Other beings and entities are in communication with us 24/7. It never stops.
Hmm.
The only thing that stops is our ability to listen to it or to process it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was my little experience from a few years ago.
Oh wow, very cool. That well, I think that it's hard to imagine that there can be energy that is darker than dark, but
Mm,
we've all seen a lot of evidence of it, shadow people, this kind of thing, and it takes a lot of energy for them to manifest. So the shadow
definitely.
people are not always, it's not always a bad thing. I mean, it
No,
is a manifestation of energy in some way. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a negative
no,
manifestation.
not at
So
all.
I think we really jump to conclusions about all these things far too easily myself. But
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
um, I, I had an experience when I was about 15 or 16, which almost made me question my sanity
mm-hmm,
because of the intensity of the experience. Like I was very experimental, and I had a lot of friends in high school and also in college. I should preface, I was probably 16 because I finished high school at 16, and then I was in college and then university. So I think this is probably more collegiate. But it was in high school that I began experimenting with my friends, and of course, we didn't use proper protection. We used Ouija boards. We
hmm,
attracted some astral trash. All these kinds of things did occur. Um, and I also was experimenting very heavily in automatic writing,
mm-hmm.
and was quite skilled at it. I don't do it anymore, but it was something it was very easy for me, and I was communicating with various entities, and I felt it was a clean kind of communication. It wasn't like the Ouija board. It was different.
Right.
I felt.
Mm-hmm,
Anyway, um, I went to after high school. I and during high school, I lived in a little tiny town that was about an hour and a half north of Los Angeles, but also on the coast, called Camarillo,
mm-hmm,
California. As in, there's a mental institution there and a few other things. It was a small farming community, believe it or not, and I
hmm,
was living there with my mother and stepfather and my siblings. So I had a friend, my named Claudia Davis, who we're still close. She lives in Alaska. She's just wonderful. And my friend Claudia and I decided to go visit our friend Sharon. Now, Sharon lived in a little town called Fillmore, I believe, or maybe Santa Paula. But anyway, the only way to get there at the
mm-hmm,
time was to travel on this very circuitous cutoff,
hmm.
a mountain pass, literally. And I don't think I had my driver's license. No, I didn't. I wasn't old enough to drive. So Claudia was driving her little Dodge Dart, and there was an area on this route that always made everybody I know uncomfortable,
Hmm.
and it was a certain part of the pass. There was a place called Egg City there, a huge chicken farming operation, egg operation. It was right there. So that was the only thing to see. There were no old structures or what have you, but
Hmm.
everybody felt awful. I could barely stand to drive past this part.
My
And
goodness.
Claudia and I, our hair would stand on end, and she'd say, "Just look straight ahead." And we had, I mean, it was a powerful, bad vibe, for lack of a better term. So on one of these trips where we were going over to through the past to visit our friend, we both started feeling the usual anxiety, the usual fight or flee emotions. Claudia was just driving,
Hmm.
and I seemed to slip into another reality. It was like I was watching a movie.
Hmm.
And what I saw was a horrendous, violent massacre of people that looked like Puritans. I now think, were they Mormons? I mean, they were dressed in what
Hmm.
I would call, or even Methodists dressed like that, a couple of hundred years ago. But it was what you would think of as Puritan type wear, and but these people were all very fair and blonde. And now I was never aware of any violent Native American encounters in that
Hmm.
part of the world, but I was later to find out that there indeed were. So um, I saw this, and it seemed to go on forever. It seemed like we were driving. I mean, time and space were completely obscured and twisted. It seemed as if we were passing. I was conscious of being in the vehicle, but my head was like in a moviola. I mean, I was
Okay.
seeing the whole thing, and it seemed like we were passing by it like 1 mile an hour. But I couldn't talk. I couldn't communicate. So I saw this horrendous massacre and loss of life. And I mean, no, even Sam Peckinpah, writing a Western couldn't have written anything this violent.
Oh,
I've never,
gory.
I would, um, I won't even bother to communicate the things that I saw, but it was horrendous. And then I seemed to just sort of come out of it and snap back into my reality. And we were driving past Egg City. I realized very quickly that Claudia saw nothing, and I didn't discuss this with her until a long time later. But what had happened in that passing through that space through automatic writing, I had taken on a spirit attachment of
Oh.
a young girl who was my age, who called herself, who was Annalise, a name I'd never heard of,
Hmm.
and she communicated with me through automatic writing for several years, and finally my friends and I were a little more aware, and we helped her to cross over.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But it was my friend Claudia was involved with that. But I have never had an experience like that since that time. um, it had to be a unique combination of being adolescent, being in puberty, being 15 or 16, and the physicality that comes with that, the the violence of the occurrence.
Hmm.
I may never have passed through any place or anything like that. As I've heard friends who've driven through down south, have driven through Vicksburg and places like that, and they have had experiences like that, where
Hmm.
suddenly they're looking at the battlefield and seeing the whole thing happen.
Hmm.
So I think there were some souls that had not crossed over, but I have to believe the majority of what I saw was a deep, deep imprint recording on space time, on the Akasha. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
Such an intense residual imprint, if you
Hmm.
will.
Hmm.
So that was my experience, and I probably never discussed this ever, aside with Claudia and the friends at the time who were involved in this. But
Oh, what a
wow,
frightening experience, Leslie. Really
yeah,
frightening. And you know what? You ended up doing a spirit rescue. But
yes,
I guess people,
later.
yeah. And there are people that go out of their way to do spirit rescues, but you were compelled to do one. It sounds
Yeah.
like. But this
Mhm.
scenario was attached to the geography, right? And
Yes,
it played
yes.
back, so to speak, did it not?
It just played back, and I have to believe that there are other sensitive people may have experienced the same phenomena that I did. What I regret doing, and what I could still do, is I regret doing proper research of that area. Um, I did, what I could find out, like at the library, and I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't able to really get any information about what native peoples were in that area. But now, with the added research capabilities of the internet, I might be able to find out more and in some way validate. The people were German, obviously. They were
Mm-hmm.
Germans. Would they have been Lutherans? Would they have been? I would have to imagine that at the time that I felt this it was still quite rustic and primitive on the West Coast. And we're talking, probably more like the very early 1800s
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
probably when that land, California, was part of Spain. That's
Okay. Okay. Right.
that's probably what we're talking about. And were we looking at people? Was I looking at people who were searching for religious freedom? Um,
Hmm.
so if there are any of our, well, we all of our viewers are intelligent and wonderful. If anyone out there is something of a historian and has any information to share with me about what types of religious groups might have been seeking religious freedom uh, on the Pacific Coast, the Central Pacific Coast, and or any other kinds of details, if you know about what Native Americans considered that to be their area. I know the Utes, Utes, were could be found in
Hmm.
Utah, as in Ute,
Mm-hmm.
into
Mm-hmm.
California, Nevada. Were they Utes? I don't know.
Well,
I don't.
Lesley.
I could draw how they looked, Wes.
Oh, that would be
The native
something to put out
peoples.
there.
I
Yeah.
can still see how they looked.
Hmm.
I could still see the kind of garb, their war garb, what they wore. And these were not Native Americans who wore a lot of feathers. There weren't feathers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, there we go. That's my little story.
Well, it's actually a big story, and it's an incredible story. And we should take this moment before I tell my next shorter story, just to say to viewers, we're accessible. You can reach either of us. You can reach me at producer@contacttv.ca.
That's right. And I can be reached at host@contacttv.ca. We have a really vibrant, wonderful Facebook page.
Oh yeah.
And we, of course, we post our ongoing episodes on our Facebook page. We put links up. We're on Twitter. We're all over the place. So please check us out, Contact TV. And boy, did we eat up this hour or what? It
Well,
seems like,
we're getting into it. I'm gonna keep my next story to be the short story because we're already over 45 minutes here. So
okay,
I'll do a short story, and then if you have you'll have time for another story if you like, and then we can.
I got a mini story,
Okay,
a mini
yeah,
one.
mine's
Okay.
kind of short too. So I would say this goes back about 12 years ago, and without mentioning the person's name, let me just say E and I, and if she watches this, she'll know. E and I went to stay the night at one of my nieces at her house, a house
Mm-hmm.
that where one of my nieces lives. And
Mm-hmm.
we were actually chatting about this the other night. So we went to stay the night because there were some unusual things detected. My niece and her children had some unusual experiences. They have to be called paranormal or ghostly experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So E and I decided, well, let's go. And while nobody's home, we'll go and we'll spend the night. And so I had a very good Nikon 35 millimeter film camera, not
Mm-hmm.
digital at the time, and I invested, and it was costly for me. It was $35 or $40 for a roll of infrared film.
Mm-hmm.
So with infrared film, if you're not familiar with it, you can do this digitally too, I understand. It takes pictures in very
Mm-hmm.
low light to next to no light. So I invested in the film, made sure my camera was okay and it was working, loaded up the film. We went off to this place. We got there at midnight or a little bit later. We went to this back room of this home and just plunked ourselves down and decided to see if we could experience anything. So she and I both had the impressions of something coming sort of out of the closet, nothing more than impressions. And I thought, well, let's just take some pictures of anywhere, of the closet, of the room, of anything. Naturally, and this is a true ghost story, the camera froze.
Huh.
I was unable to get a single picture, and in fact, it would not work until I took the film out later. And
Yeah.
so that was the investment for the infrared film. I had to throw it away. No photos were taken. The camera worked perfectly after that night and had worked perfectly before that night. And it's only very, very recently, like within the past few days, I've heard that indeed somebody was either murdered or killed there.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So you had a disturbed soul probably,
Oh,
and a
yeah.
lot of chaotic energy going, which of course always wreaks havoc. I think especially more even with the old analog
Yeah.
style stuff than the digital can sometimes overcome it, which is how we now can get some good EVPs
Definitely.
and other stuff. It's but still in all, even the digital stuff can be messed with. So by
Mm-hmm.
chaotic energy. Wow, fascinating. Well, I'll just throw this one little story in. I think we'll be ready to go.
Good.
Um, I was now I'm at university, and I went to a very this was old Gothic. I went to the University of South Dakota, and it's probably is maybe even older than the University of Toronto. It's
Hmm.
many Midwest colleges were in place before when they were just territories, like the Dakota Territory. It was
Okay.
that kind of thing. So some of the buildings were extremely Gothic and extremely old. And of course, the oldest, most rundown building on campus was given to the theater department. You know, in
Naturally.
typical fashion, right? And it was lovingly called Old Main. It had a little stage in there, but it was old. It was old. It was should have been called really effing Old Main. But there we were. So the way that I worked my way through university is I worked all night in the state mental hospital on the graveyard shift from
Hmm.
11 at night till 7 in the morning. Now, there's a
Mm-hmm.
book there, by the way. We'll talk
Whoa.
later. But anyway, I was acting as a psychiatric aide. I later became a psychiatric technician, and my early interest in mental health care began then, really, at age, let's say, 17. So I was always thrashed from no sleep. You know, and I did this somehow without any, amphetamines or other. I don't know how I did it, but I did it. So I arrived in Old Main very early in the morning, right after work, for my theater history class because I would stay up and have my classes in the morning. That's how I did it. So I was the only one in the building. This was very, very early, and when I walked into the building, I had that kind of creepy feeling like I
Hmm.
was being watched. The hair was standing up on my head, and I looked over towards the staircase leading up, the
Hmm.
old staircase, and sort of superimposed on the staircase, I saw a soldier in a uniform that I did not recognize. It was light blue mostly, and there was a musket. I mean, with a where they bayonet on the end of
Bayonet
it.
on the end,
A
yeah.
bayonet. It was very old stuff. So we're talking into the 1700s now. The uniform looked, and the soldier did not react to me,
Hmm.
but was walking up a hill that wasn't there.
Oh
That
my.
was sort of he was sort of levitating above the staircase, and he was translucent, which is more commonly how I see things if I'm going to see something this day at this
Yeah.
age that I am. So he was translucent, and I watched him walk up the staircase and disappear into nothing. So of course I ran out of Old Main, and many years later, I was watching The Last of the Mohicans, the film with Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
It came Mary Elizabeth Stowe, really good movie, but very disturbing and dark. Anyway, in one sequence, they're in North America, they're up in the Niagara region, and um, the French soldiers are wearing their summer uniforms, which are light blue.
Oh my.
And
Hmm.
I had no idea of this. I had dismissed the whole experience as maybe a hallucination from being overtired. But the French army was all over the place here.
Uh-huh.
My
Uh-huh.
God, Louisiana, and of course right into Canada
Yep.
with the provinces in eastern Canada, and of course Quebec. There were
Yep.
French soldiers everywhere fighting the English,
Yes.
trying to maintain their territory. So
Mm-hmm.
I saw a French soldier in his summer uniform, and maybe that uniform only was worn in the United States in the summertime. I've never seen a picture of that. The only time I've ever seen those light-colored uniforms portrayed was in the film The Last of the Mohicans.
Oh my gosh. Well, this serves, Lesley, to let our viewers know that while we can't attribute everything that goes bump in the night to be a ghost, you will
Right.
have genuine experiences. And sometimes, like the one you just told, Lesley, you're able to move from belief to knowing because you
Yeah.
actually were able to validate it or substantiate it later.
Yes.
And we
Many
always.
years many years later.
Mhm.
I mean, I really wasn't sure if I was having an acid flashback or I really doubted what I saw, and I had attributed it to sleep deprivation. But it
Understandably.
wasn't.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
wasn't. And I had a validation many, many, many years later. So there you go.
So, our
Well,
viewers, wow, we're
I hope
done.
we've I hope we've creeped you out pretty good there, kids. And we didn't even talk about our spirit rescue in Toronto. There, I mean, we have a couple more shows where we could go with some great stories. So we'll
Hmm.
we'll do this. We'll do this again. We will. And Wes, is there anything you'd like to say before we sign off until our next program?
Well, a couple of things, I guess. One is, as you said before, to our good friend Greg, all the best, man. We're really gunning for your success. To
Yes.
all our viewers, to our supporters, to the folks at MUFON, Stu Bundy, and many others, we
Hmm.
say thank you, and we're continuing to do this, what we feel to be good work, and we're
Yes.
continuing this relationship and exchange. So get in touch with us if you have something you need to say.
That's right. Or I should maybe just add, if you yourself believe you have had an experience or a contact of high strangeness,
Yes.
we would love to chat with you. And if you feel comfortable, have you guest with us and tell your story. So
Hmm.
that's our little All Hallows Eve report, and we hope we've, if not scared you, at least intrigued you this evening.
Hmm.
Remember, the veil is thin. This is a good time for a blessing, a good time for a spell, a good time for anything that would involve communicating with the more spiritual parts of life. So we hope that you do that, and we wish you well, and happy Celtic New Year. Have a blessed Samhain, and we're going to see you in a couple weeks with an amazing guest.
We will. So, all the best, and thank you, Lesley. Happy Halloween.
And remember, we are clearly not alone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for watching Contact TV.
We would like to thank our generous sponsors Lightwork Hypnosis, UFOria and the UFOria Chronicles, Earth Mystery News, Conspiracy Culture Books, MUFON Canada, Free Experiencers, the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, and Variety Store Productions.
For guest booking information, please email Wes Roberts at producer@contacttv.ca. And don't forget to join us on Facebook and Twitter.